Jimmy Savile, of course, helped raise millions of pounds for good causes. Now, though, two charities bearing his name are shutting down for good.
Trustees from the Jimmy Savile Charitable Trust and the Jimmy Savile Stoke Mandeville Hospital Trust made the decision last night. We can speak now to Jo Summers, who's a solicitor for the charities, and she joins us now. Jo, thanks very much for joining us this morning after what must have been difficult meetings for both charities, given the amount of work that they've been doing.
Yes, it was. It was a very difficult decision. It was thought through very hard. It wasn't an easy decision to make, but the trustees felt that in total it was the right decision.
Did they think about renaming the charities, taking Jimmy Savile's name off so that the work could continue?
They did, yes. We talked about that at some length, and that had been suggested to us by a number of people, but the feeling was that the charities would always be the ones that Jimmy Savile set up, even under a different name. It would just be rebranding, and we felt that overall the harm has been done, that the charities, we can't foresee a future of fundraising given the associations with Jimmy Savile, sadly.
So the money raised is being redistributed elsewhere. How much money are we talking about?
It varies. We haven't got the final figures for the Jimmy Savile Charitable Trust because that depends on the sale of some of the properties that Jimmy owned. So that hasn't been finalised yet, but we are talking millions in each charity, and you're right that we will be distributing that to a number of charitable beneficiaries.
How busy have these both trusts been in recent weeks since the scandal broke?
Extremely. Ironically, we've received more requests for funding in the last 2 weeks than in the last 2 years. Although both charities have existed since the 80s and it's always been public knowledge, I think that the higher profile in the last 2 weeks has raised awareness. So we've received a very large number of requests for funding.
Requests for what exactly?
Everything from people asking for help with their personal, educational, medical bills, all the way through to bigger charities asking for funding. We've been in discussions with a number of charities as to how we can best assist and make sure that the good work continues.
I presume that we're talking about millions of pounds still. I know you can't put an exact figure on it, but if it is that big a figure, then deciding where the money should go is actually quite a big and sensitive job.
It is. And one of the decisions we took was that we don't think it's appropriate for us to announce where the money's going. We think that the charities that receive the money should have the choice whether to tell people where the money came from or to say it was from an anonymous donor. We think that they should be able to choose rather than us forcing the decision on them.
And the trustees on both charities would consist of people who have known Jimmy Savile for some considerable time, I would imagine.
Yes, decades.
And was there some soul-searching at these meetings about what people suspected or felt that they should have known about him?
We did discuss this. The feeling was that all the charity trustees thought they knew him well and have decided they clearly didn't. They don't recognise the person that's being described in the papers. They saw nothing to give them any cause for concern at any time. Yes, he was eccentric, he could be a bit cantankerous at times, and yes, he had always got a bit of a smutty joke, but there was nothing more than that to suggest any cause for concern. So they are very, very upset and shocked at the revelations and allegations that are coming out.
Did they feel the need at all to make a statement of some sort about what their view is now of him?
No, they don't think that's appropriate. Their sole aim in life is to safeguard the charitable beneficiaries and the charitable causes that they've been working with, and for them that is far more important than anything about Jimmy's lifetime or what their views are.
All right. Jo Summers, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
And the former Director General, Mark Thompson, has also been facing questions about what he knew. He says he was told the piece had been dropped, but knew nothing more.
I was not involved in the decision-making about it.
The police, the BBC and a number of hospitals are now all carrying out their own investigations and inquiries. And there's a key thread running through all of this. Who knew and why has it only emerged now? David Soletto, BBC News.
Well, we're expecting the BBC's Director General George Entwistle to appear before the Select Committee at about 10:30 this morning. The chairman of that committee, John Whittingdale, has said that there are many questions still to be answered by Mr Entwistle on this scandal, including any alleged abuse of children on BBC premises. And Mr Whittingdale has said that the BBC is damaged very badly by these revelations and the fact it's taking so long to resolve so many issues.
Mr. Entwistle will also face questions about a reported conversation he had with the BBC Director of News, Helen Bowden, who told him in his role as head of BBC Television about the Newsnight investigation and its possible impact on the planned tributes to Jimmy Savile for broadcast over Christmas. Well, this was Helen Bowden arriving for work this morning.
Good morning. Did you see the panorama last night?
Morning, gentlemen.
Is the BBC in crisis?
No.
Helen Bowden arriving at Television Centre this morning. Well, our chief political correspondent, Norman Smith, is in Westminster. We can join him now. Morning, Norman.
Martin, huge day for the BBC and for the Director General, George Entwistle. It's actually, I'm told, the first time he has ever appeared before a Commons Select Committee. So a fairly daunting baptism of fire, where I suspect attention will focus not just on the details, the questions he answers in detail, but also his performance and whether he manages to convince people that he has got a grip of this whole scandal. Well, joining me is the chairman of that committee, the Conservative John Whittingdale. I mean, key questions you want to ask him.
Well, I think George Entwistle's first task today is to begin to restore confidence in the BBC and in his leadership. There are some very big questions to address. Obviously, the original question was around Jimmy Savile and how it was that he was able to behave in this way, apparently over many years, and nobody rang any alarm bells. But much more close to home for George Entwistle are the questions about how the BBC have handled the revelations of the last few weeks, about why the Newsnight investigation was dropped, and that the BBC's explanation, we're now told, was incorrect, and also about his own knowledge and what he was told by the Director of News when he was head of Vision.
Potentially, is his job on the line?
Well, this is a crisis. He's only been in the job for 4 weeks, but he has got a very serious and urgent task to do to restore confidence. And we are looking forward to hearing from him. I think he was right to volunteer to come before the committee this morning. As you say, it's his first appearance, and I'm sure he wouldn't have wanted it to be in these circumstances, but it is absolutely right that he take a lead and be seen to be addressing these issues in public.
Given the nature of the scandal, given the BBC's response to it, given the fact there's already had to be clarifications on some of the statements put out, how credible is it, do you think, that the BBC can emerge from this without scalps, without people having to resign?
Well, John Simpson last night said this was the most serious crisis he'd known in all his years in broadcasting. It is very serious for the BBC. A lot of damage has been done. We need to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. If serious errors of judgment were made, then obviously that does call into question the people who make them and whether or not they should continue. But I think it's too soon at this stage. We need to know exactly what happened first before calling for scalps.
Downing Street yesterday said they were confident the BBC took these allegations seriously. What is your assessment so far of the BBC's handling of these allegations?
I think the BBC's handling has been lamentable. The BBC were very slow in realising how serious these matters were and in setting up the inquiries. And now, even yesterday, when you have the reporters and the producer on the Newsnight programme publicly disagreeing with the explanations that have been given by the BBC as to why the programme didn't proceed, and the BBC then having to issue a statement saying that they got it wrong. Why it took so long for them to realise that? All of these are very serious matters and do leave big questions about how the BBC have handled this, and I would expect George Entwistle to recognise that when he talks to us this morning.
And how would you assess the mood amongst MPs? I mean, do you detect a hardening of opinion towards the BBC because of the way it has handled this?
I don't think it necessarily affects the overall attitude to the BBC, except that it has done damage to the BBC's reputation. The BBC has a worldwide reputation for trust and integrity, and anything which jeopardises that is obviously very serious, it is why we need to clear up these allegations very quickly.
And just briefly, we have the Nick Pollard review into the Newsnight element of this story. That, we are told, is going to report within weeks. Do you think that timescale is acceptable?
Well, I think it needs to report as quickly as possible. Every day that we get more allegations made and these questions are not answered does further damage to the BBC. The BBC recognised that by saying that the Pollard inquiry would be conducted very quickly, but I would want them to publish its findings as fast as possible, and that certainly means, in talking about weeks, it means 1 or 2, not 3 or 4 or 5.
Okay, John Whittingdale, thanks so much. Martin, Simon, huge day, 10:30, the committee starts.
We'll be there. Thank you, Norman. Our media commentator Steve Hewlett is here in the studio. A little bit of a heads up for George Entwistle from John Whittingdale about what he might be covering later. But you just wonder how far his appearance at this committee will either add to or ease the pressure on the BBC.
Well, look, there's a certain amount of theatre in this, and John Whittingdale's pretty well saying it, that George Entwistle has got to, this has to create some confidence that someone has got a grip. And at the moment, it doesn't really feel like anyone's got a grip. Both George Entwistle, the director of, we talked about this yesterday, George Entwistle, the director of editorial policy, and indeed the chairman of the trust, have all been out in public saying things based upon Peter Rippon's blog, which we now know to be untrue. Now, we discussed it yesterday, but that never leaves an organisation looking good. George has been looking sort of pasty, nervous. He's been chased down the street by journalists doorstepping him. In one case, an ITV journalist asked him, had the BBC behaved properly? He said, yes, we took everything to the police straight away, and we now know that that's not true. Everywhere he goes, right, and the other problem for George, of course, is that he was at the scene of the crime. Remember, the kind of Category 1 disaster for the BBC would occur if it were demonstrated that corporate interests had infected journalism. There is no evidence that that actually happened. Anyone who knows the organisation thinks it's the most unlikely explanation of events. Nothing in the Panorama programme shows that that's what happened, but that's why. And of course the problem for George is, in one sense, this would be tailor-made for a new Director General, show that they're in charge, lead the organisation through a difficult moment, the right person for the job, broad shoulders and all this leadership. The trouble is, he's compromised from the start because he was at the scene of the crime. So firstly he's going to be asked about what happened. There's what happened then and there's what happened now. Remember, then he was Director of Vision. We know there was a conversation between him and Helen Bowden, the head of news, where she said something to the effect of, she said, Jimmy Savile, investigation at Newsnight. He claims that she didn't say anything else and he didn't ask, and he's gone further than that. He's absolutely categorically said he didn't know it was about child abuse, he didn't know what evidence the BBC had got, and so on. Now, were anything to emerge, either this morning or later, that demonstrated that that isn't absolutely and 100% correct, then he's toast, frankly, because he's been absolutely categorical about it. But that's then. I mean, because then, if he knew anything at all other than investigation, why did he carry on with his Christmas schedule, which at the time he was with the tribute programmes he was responsible for? Then there's kind of now, which is how the whole thing's been handled. The BBC's been on the back foot. Even yesterday, when they corrected Peter Rippon's blog on those 3 very important points, they omitted to correct it on another point, which the journalists involved had been going on about since the start, which was, what was the point of the investigation? Mr. Rippon and others have said that the investigations, Newsnight's programme started life as an investigation into a Crown Prosecution Service decision. The journalists always said, that's rubbish. It started life as an investigation into whether Jimmy Savile was a paedophile. Now, it may seem a small point, but because the programme is dropped on the basis that the Crown Prosecution Service aspect of the story didn't stand up, which indeed it didn't, right, to portray it as always having been about that, it is regarded by them to be it's wrong, actually. They don't just say it, they're right, it is wrong. This morning, or last night, the BBC finally admit, after they've corrected the blog, that this other thing is also wrong. So you kind of think, at every point it's being dragged out of them. So he really needs to get on the front foot here and convince MPs and everybody else who's watching that somebody is in charge.
We have got this Pollard review into all of this. We've also got George Entwistle offering to go to the committee today. But more and more MPs are speaking up about this, and some saying that the BBC can't be trusted to conduct its own review. It needs something bigger, something outside of itself.
Well, look, I this not matters about my pay grade. All I say is that Nick Pollard, has never. I don't think he ever worked at the BBC. He may have done very, very early on, but maybe. But he's well known for his work at ITV News and ITN. Very well known as one of the sort of directors, the guy who ran Sky News for such a long time. He's thoroughly independent, completely outside the structure, nowhere near it. You won't get more independent than that, and also, you know, he really knows what he's talking about. So, in terms of getting to the bottom of this, you could do an awful lot worse than having Nick Pollard do it. But I don't personally think there's a real issue about the supposed independence of these inquiries, both that one and the bigger one into what happened 40 years ago. I think it will be thoroughly independent, although they've been done under the auspices of the BBC. I don't imagine for a second the BBC is going to be in a position to influence or control the actual course of events when those inquiries get underway.
Steve, for the moment, thank you.
You're welcome.